get started again. Our next speaker is Dr. Jennifer Garrison. Jennifer Garrison is the co-founder and director of the Global Consortium for Reproductive Longevity and Equality and a faculty member at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. She also holds appointments in the Department of Cellular and Molecular Pharmacology at UCSF, as well as USC. She is a passionate advocate for women's health and is pioneering a new movement to advance science focused on understanding ovarian aging. Her lab studies how the mind-body connection influences systemic aging and how changes in the complex dialogue between the ovary and the brain during middle age may lead to menopause. Please help me welcome to the stage Dr. Jennifer Garrison.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, and thank you to Kristen and Longevity Global for including me here. I'm very excited to tell you about some of the work we've been doing around reproductive aging. So here we are at the Buck Institute. I do have a research... Oh, you can't hear me? How about now? Let me see if I can bend this to my will. How about now? Yeah? Okay. Do that again if you can't hear me, because it all sounds the same up here. Here we are at the Buck Institute. I have a research lab here, but I'm not going to discuss my science per se. I want to tell you about these initiatives that we've been building over the last few years that are so important, not just for research science, but I think for the aging space in general. So Buck is unique in that it brings together scientists from all kinds of disciplines to study basic biological mechanisms of aging, and that is really because aging is a public health pandemic. Right? There are soon going to be more people over the age of 65 than there are under the age of 5 for the first time in our history. And of course, age is the #1 risk factor for many diseases of the modern world. And I think thanks to basic science discoveries at places like this and all over the world, we now know that biological aging is malleable, right? So if we can understand the underlying mechanisms behind it, we can exploit that knowledge then to intervene. That's the promise. I think we should take bets on how many times you're going to see some version of this today. But I think it's an important place to start for my talk because we've all seen this graph, functional decline during age across your organ systems. It's not synchronous, but the major decline does happen in the last couple of decades of life if you're lucky enough to live to old age. Now, there's one thing that falls off of this curve in a dramatic way, and that is the female reproductive system. So these organs are aging precociously. Now, I want to take a side step here and just say something about language. So I'm going to use the words woman and female to refer to anyone who happens to have or ever have had ovaries. Language is a problem. I'm actually working on trying to find new language to talk about these things. I even think calling them reproductive organs is problematic. And so hopefully maybe by the end of my talk, someone in the audience will have some inspiration for me. And I'd love to hear from you after this if you've got any ideas. But reproductive aging happens in both males and females. The difference is illustrated here. And that is that in men, it's really synced up with aging in the rest of their bodies, whereas with women, it falls off this cliff. And so if we're thinking about extending healthy longevity, if we don't address reproductive span, or the age at which this happens in females, then we are suddenly going to have women living more of their lives in a compromised health state, and that can't happen. We're talking about half the population here. So ovaries are what I started with, and ovaries are really aging at an accelerated rate. So they're aging at somewhere between 2.5 and 5 times the rate of other tissues in a woman's body, depending on who you talk to and what you're measuring. But this ovarian aging is going to impact every single woman on the planet who happens to live to midlife. And so as one of the first organs to age in the human body, it is also really interesting from the perspective of just thinking about aging biology. All of the pathways that we know about, the conserved pathways that we know about that modulate aging, things like TOR signaling, things like NAD boosters and signaling, all of those pathways are conserved here. And so if we can understand what it is that's causing ovaries to age prematurely, that will give us a clue about aging in the rest of the body. Now, a woman's ovaries are considered geriatric by the medical community when she is in her late 20s, early 30s. When the rest of her tissues are functioning at peak performance. And I think most people in the audience will be familiar with the downstream consequences of this with respect to fertility and baby making. Things like infertility and miscarriages and birth defects. But ovaries are also endocrine organs, okay? So separate from their impact on reproduction, they are making dozens of hormones. Now, hormones are just chemicals that signal over long distances in your body, and there are hundreds of them. Ovaries are making at least a few dozen, and those hormones, those signaling molecules, are essentially signaling to every one of these tissues listed here, in addition to several others. And what they're doing is they're promoting general health. And so this has nothing to do with reproduction. Ovaries really are like a pacemaker for aging in women's bodies. And when their function declines in midlife, when they stop making these hormones or when they start fluctuating, that leads to a lot of downstream consequences that are separate from reproduction. So I think this is the most important slide I'll show you. We need to start thinking about women's health through the lens of ovarian function, because these are the organs that are the most important ones to maintain health during aging. So those hormones are promoting health, and when they go away at menopause or near menopause, that can lead to a whole host of different health risks. Now, it doesn't necessarily cause disease, but it does greatly increase risk of things like cardiovascular disease. That goes up fourfold at menopause. Osteoporosis, autoimmune disorders, everything listed here, I won't go through it. But we actually consider this more than just a health issue. It is an issue of equality, because the fact that women experience this reproductive decline in midlife essentially impacts every aspect of their well-being, not just their health, but also their career decisions, family planning. All of these things are overshadowed by a ticking biological clock in the background. So whether or not a woman wants to have biological children, this is something that's really important from the aspect of equality. Now, even with an audience that's very literate in this space, I think it's important that we point out exactly what we're talking about here. And there are a lot of myths and misconceptions. This is a very simplified cartoon of what happens in terms of both the number of eggs that are in the ovaries and the quality of those eggs over time. Okay, and so what I want to say here is this cartoon is approximately the resolution with which we understand how this stuff works. So if I had to just tell you in one sentence what it is we're trying to do, we want to understand how female bodies work, period, full stop. So at the level of the ovaries, female humans are born with all the eggs that they'll ever have. So before birth, a female fetus has about 6 or 7 million eggs on average. By the time birth happens, that number has decreased to 1 million. By the time puberty happens, that number has gone down to about 350,000. And then each month that a female cycles, she loses about 1,000 eggs on average. So she'll ovulate 1, but she'll lose 999 to atresia. So at some point, when that number gets very low, that's when women go through menopause. And so this period of time on the x-axis between birth and menopause is what we refer to as reproductive span-ish. You can also start it at puberty if you want to. But the science here is really fascinating. What I want to point out are two things on this slide. One is that female physiology is incredibly complex, maybe the most complex signature in all of human health, and we need to treat it that way. And so we don't understand what is driving this. What are the cues or timers or constellation of cues and timers that so reproducibly tell a woman's ovaries to start to age when she's in her 20s? And that is the discovery science that we are trying to do here. The science is really fascinating, but completely unknown. And I will say that this is an average. At the level of the individual, the graph doesn't look like this. It goes like this. And not just at the end, all the way through. And so this is a place where personalized, individualized medicine is going to become really important. There are a few things that we do know that are fascinating, but also puzzling. One is older age at menopause, or increased reproductive span or ability to produce children, is correlated with increased longevity. So women who go through menopause later tend to live longer. Now, if you take a look at the x-axis here, this is age at natural menopause. Normal spans a 10-year window. There's nothing else in human biology that is so variable at the level of the individual. And if we could understand that variability, why it's happening, that would give us a clue about what those underlying mechanisms are. But maybe more important for some members of the audience, brothers of women who go through menopause later also tend to live longer. Now, these are associations. They're correlations. We have absolutely no idea what the underlying mechanisms are. But if we could understand this, it would clearly be important not just for women, but also for men. We are also very strange in the animal kingdom. So I need to update this slide because I think there might be a few more species to add here. But we humans are in the extreme minority in terms of animals that go through menopause. It's us and a few species of whale, possibly some New World monkeys, maybe giraffes. But whether it's 5 species or 8 or 9, it's still really rare. And so what that tells me as a scientist is that this is not a biological imperative. We don't necessarily need to have this reproductive strategy. And so if it's not necessary, let's think about how to improve it, at least with the perspective of improving women's health. So our goal here is to reframe the narrative around healthy aging in women, to really focus things through this pacemaker of aging. And I've described to you some of the profound consequences of reproductive aging, but we don't understand the most basic things about it. We don't know what sets it in motion, we don't know why it varies so much, and we also don't know why it happens so early. But imagine if we could change this even just a little bit, whether we change the slope of the curve, whether we change the endpoint. This would have a dramatic impact, not just on a women's ability to have agency and choice about when they start their families, but it would also give them more healthy years, and that's really what we're here for. So how is it possible that we don't know this, right? Like, come on. Actually, the deeper you dive, the more horrifying it becomes. So this is, I would say it's the result of a number of different things that you can probably all guess, persistent societal taboos about talking about women's bodies. I think that's changing quite a bit over the last 5 to 10 years. Massive underfunding for research, okay? Like massive underfunding. What do we fund that fuels the knowledge that we have? And this area has been woefully underfunded forever. So what I'm showing you here is the budget for the National Institutes of Health from last year. This is the largest biomedical research funding body in the US. It was about 46 billion, 45 billion. Of that, about 10% went to all of women's health from conception through death. And of that, basically a rounding error went to study these questions about aging in the female system. So there's a lot of consequences to this. One glaring consequence is that many of the drugs that are pulled from the market due to health concerns, these are FDA-approved drugs that get pulled because of health or safety concerns, are pulled because of adverse effects in women. Now, that is because they were never tested in women. And if we think about what's happening on the private side, the story is not much better. So last year, there was 10 times more investment in all of women's health than there was in 2017, which is great. So we're moving in the right direction. But it still makes up less than 4% of the total investment in biotech. And so I don't understand how that's possible in this day and age when we're talking about half the population. If we take a step back, I just showed you the numbers for 2022. This is the NIH budget since 2018. So it is getting better. Year over year, it's getting better, but it's not accelerating at the rate we need it to actually make a difference. I will also say, and I think that Daisy will touch on this in her talk, that the last piece of the puzzle here is that biomedical research has used the male body as biology's baseline for all of history. And so it's not just a lack of funding, it is literally a lack of data. If 80% of the studies are only using male animals, then how could we ever know anything about what's happening in female systems? And And finally, for those of you who care about these sorts of things, I think it's important to understand just how profound the cost is in terms of economics. Now, these are very hand-wavy numbers. They're not mine, but they're on the low end of the estimates that I found in different places. So by 2025, that's 2 years from now, over 12% of the world's population will be at or past menopause. That's incredible. When you consider that, not just the annual healthcare costs that are associated with those increased health risks that come with menopause, but also the costs that come from lost productivity, lost work, from the vasomotor symptoms that happen during that transition period, which can last anywhere from 4 to 10 years. So this is a huge opportunity for you all in the audience. This is the global market for women's health last year, 42 billion, but is predicted to be almost 60 billion by 2030. Now notice that women over 50 make up a large percentage of this, and of that, about 40% is the menopause market. So 16 billion right now, but predicted to be 30 billion. And I guarantee that you have heard more about menopause in the last 3 years than you have ever heard about menopause in your life, unless you are going through it, right? And that, I mean, I hope that's partly because of our efforts. We started 3 years ago. But despite that, only 5% of startups are focused on women in this age range, despite the fact that these are the people who are making the financial decisions. So there's some math here that isn't adding up, and I hope that people will wake up to this soon. But I will also say that every company that exists, with a couple of exceptions, and you're going to hear from one of them in 2 talks, with a few exceptions, every company out there is treating the symptoms, not the underlying causes. Now, we need these Band-Aids, no question. We absolutely need these Band-Aids. They're super important. I'm so glad they exist. But our role here is to fund the discovery science, to increase the knowledge, so we have the IP, to start the companies, to do real interventions. So we don't need these Band-Aids anymore. I will also say to anyone who cares about testing aging interventions in humans, this is a really unique model of accelerated aging, right? These are systems that you could test in young females. The outputs are really easy, so I would just put that out there as a proxy for testing longevity interventions. All right, so what are we doing? Oh, that got a little messed up. A few years ago, here at the Buck Institute, we started a center. We recognized all of this. We decided it was important, with some really amazing support and help from Nicole Shanahan and the Bia Echo Foundation as our seed funders. We started this center. You can go see it. It's 2 buildings over on the 3rd floor. And this brings together scientists at Buck, scientists from other institutions, and some scientists who are in the audience here, to study this question, to try to understand what are those drivers of ovarian aging. But almost as soon as we started, we realized that we here, a group of, even if it was all of us at the Buck studying it, not enough, not nearly enough to make a dent in what we need to do to make a real difference here. So to strengthen and broaden our reach, we started a global consortium. Now, our only goal is to facilitate and accelerate translating scientific discoveries at the bench into women's hands faster, however we can achieve that. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in the interest of time, but I will say that we're trying to build an ecosystem here that includes not just scientists and clinicians, but also ambassadors, funders, anyone who has an interest in the space. And the first thing we started with was the funding, because like I said, what we fund translates into what we know. So we're giving away grants to scientists all over the world. We've had 2 rounds. We've funded 49 scientists. I'm really excited about that, and I can talk about that more if you're interested in it. But truly, we're funding work that is meant to be a paradigm shift in how we approach healthy aging in women. These are some of the kinds of projects we've funded, and I will point out again that reproductive aging is all by itself a problem. We need to change that language. This is a busy slide, but I just wanted to point out that grants is up here in the left corner. That's just one piece of what we're doing. And I won't go through all of this, but if you have any interest in learning about what we're doing, you can go to our website, and I'm also happy to talk to people. I'll be here all day long. But if our goal is to solve ovarian aging, we need to enable an army of creative people to tackle this problem. I'm going to skip through this in the interest of time. And I will say we have done a media campaign, and I think we are changing the narrative. And very quickly, I will say that also at 11 a.m., we were supposed to have had an announcement of the Menopause Research and Equality Act. I actually don't know if it was announced because it was supposed to be announced in October, and then it got pushed, and then it got pushed again. But maybe while I was talking, we'll have the first legislation that would provide some research funding around this question. Yeah. $100 million a year for 2 years isn't enough, but it's a good start. And then last but not least, I just want to leave you with this picture. So this is what we have to understand about healthy aging in women. We need to stop thinking about women's health just about being through the reproductive organs. We need to take that word away. We need to get rid of the word reproductive, because that really has allowed not me, but other people, to pigeonhole all of women's health through this lens of baby making. And while that's a really important function of all of these organs, it's not the only one. So that's it. I want to thank Alison Rodriguez, who is my chief of staff and administrative lead. She's amazing. We have a wonderful scientific advisory council that helps us choose the grants, and then past members of the GCRLE who have helped us get all of this done. And the Bia Echo Foundation has been incredibly supportive and really has driven this and recognized early that it was important. But we need you. We need you to be ambassadors to talk about what I've just told you. And spread the word. We also need funders. So as much money as I can raise for these grants, we can give away. And I would love to take our existing grantees and give them a path to sustainable funding. So at the end of 2 years, when their grant runs out, if they're doing something cool and exciting, we want them to be able to continue it. So we're raising a second pot of money that would be for sustainable funding in that way. That's all I have. Are we doing questions? I actually don't know. Okay, any questions? Yeah.
I think. Oh. Sorry, go ahead. Oh. I'm in the back here, and I'll go second. So I think he was up in the front.
Oh, okay. Are there any biomarkers to be able to measure the aging of the word yet to be determined?
Thank you. No, I mean, there are some things you can measure. You can measure a handful of hormones, not all of the ones that we think are important, but you can measure a handful of them. The problem is you can only measure them at one time point, and a static snapshot of something that is an incredibly dynamic process is not helpful. So I would say that that's the lowest hanging fruit, biomarkers and diagnostics, and that is where the most progress is being made right now in terms of not just identifying new biomarkers, but also finding a way to measure the resolution that we need to gather the data to understand what those hormone levels mean. Because if I go and get my hormone levels measured right now, and maybe 10 days from now, because that's how much blood I can give, those two data points aren't going to tell me much, because we don't have the data to understand what that means. Yeah, it's horrifying when you start to dig into it.
So I'm back in the back here.
Oh, hi.
Hey there. So I'm the Director of Population Health at Olink. My name is Cindy Lawley. I wonder, one of the things I can say about that question is there are a set of proteins, actually, that we use to confirm that we haven't made a plate mix-up that are gender associated. Might be interesting to know. Maybe there's promise there. But the question I had is, have you talked to Melinda Gates? Have you gotten these numbers in front of her? And where's Oprah?
Well, okay. Yes, I have. I have not talked to Oprah. Well, actually, let me just make that point. Sometimes I make this point, sometimes I forget. There are multiple male billionaires who have pumped a lot of money into the longevity space, and I would venture to say that that's why a lot of you are here today. That you know about it, that you know that this is an important thing to pay attention to. We don't have anything like that on the female side, and we should. Melinda Gates, I don't know her, no, but if someone wants to introduce me, I'm happy to talk.
Well, I, for one, just fell in love with you just during your talk, so I think she would be impressed by those numbers. To see you quantify it that way is really quite amazing.
Thanks.
Thanks.